Do the ends justify the means? This is a question that Philip Zimmerman and I explore in our conversation on this week's episode of Construction Genius. Philip is an expert in the interaction between generations in the workplace, specifically how boomers and late Gen Xers who own construction companies and who are going to be passing them on to the next level of leadership, the millennials who are becoming senior leaders in their organizations, how those generations interact together, the different perspectives they have on how a company should be run, and how they can work together in order to move a business forward for the next 15 to 20 years. And the reason we talk about do the ends justify the means is because different generations have different answers to that question. And the answer to that question can have a huge impact upon your business. So listen to this interview with Philip. He has a lot of insight into how boomers and Gen Xers can make sure that their business is going to be successful for the next 15 to 20 years as the millennials take over. And you're going to walk away with some key insights into what you can do today to build a healthier, more dynamic organization. I appreciate you listening to Construction Genius here today. Feel free to give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts, and share this podcast with other people that you think may benefit from it. Enjoy my conversation with Philip. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Philip, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be here.
You took a pivot in your career from running multiple businesses that were extremely successful into teaching high school. Why did you do that?
It's a great question, and it's one that I don't have any question about in my own personal life. I was a Christian by faith tradition and was not attending church at the time when this first occurred, and trying to get our kids into a Sunday school, went to a church service, and something happened to me in one of these church services where it changed my whole life. I came to a new realization of my Christian faith, and I struggled with it for a long time. And I went and talked to the pastor that leading the congregation at the time, and I said, that this is just really something. I'm different. I'm just different than I was before I walked in the door. And anyway, he said, well, just hang with it and see what happens. And about 6 months later, I had a very vivid dream that I was supposed to teach high school students, of all things. And that was real strange for me because I'm in the middle of the world, right? Very successful in business. Like, what are you talking about? Change profession. This is crazy. And it took me about 3 years to work through that. But I just could not shake it. I knew that I was supposed to go back and teach high school students for what I didn't know at the time. And so I went back and got another degree and another master's degree, and it provided me the opportunity to go teach at a local high school here in where I live, and it's kind of how I got into.
How old were you when that happened?
43.
You built multiple businesses, very successful from a business point of view, and I think this happens to a lot of men and women when they hit their 40s. I think particularly for men. Obviously, I can speak to myself being a man, that you hit your 40s and you begin to reflect on your life, your successes. Was that kind of a crisis time for you?
It was a crisis in the time in regards to faith. From a regard to it, my faith was dramatically changed. But the big crisis that I came to in that struggle was that I had run some very successful businesses. I sold a business, and I had resources in the bank, as if I had to work. I didn't have to work, and I just had this feeling that there's something I needed to be doing that was more giving back than was taking. And so that's what I did. I just dropped out of the work world, and my friends were just shocked at me for doing this. Like, are you crazy? Like, why would you give this up? And it was like, because there's something more important that I have to do, and that we all need to be starting paying attention to. And I'm very glad I did it, because I learned a lot in the 12 years that I was in the classroom.
So let me ask you then, as you hit the classroom, you come from the business world where you're dealing with adults, You hit the classroom. Now, I'm assuming you have kids of your own?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so obviously you're working with kids, but then what was your first impression or first experience as you got into the classroom? And what time frame are we looking at here? What year was this around?
2003.
Okay, so 2003. So this, we're talking about almost 20 years ago.
Right.
So what sort of generation were you working with once you got into the classroom?
I was working with millennial students, and millennials started entering the workforce in droves in about 2004, 2005. So it was really at the beginning when millennials were entering the workforce. And so I was teaching millennials who were about 4 years or 5 years behind them because they were high school seniors. And I didn't really recognize the differences in the generations as much when I initially started teaching. It was as I started to get to know them better, because you'd have a fresh batch of students every year. In one particular class, I had a student who plagiarized on an assignment, and that wasn't unusual, but it was against school.
I've done that when I was in school.
It was against school rules. So I took the student outside the classroom, not to embarrass the person, and described to him that they called it plagiarizing, and the person just denied it. And I said, "Well, wait a minute, you did plagiarize. I have your paper right here. Oh, no, that's my own work. I typed that myself." I said, "Wait, okay. Here's the internet resource that you got this from." I pulled up the internet resource that I had it in my hand. "This is the website you got it from. Here are the words, word for word, 3 paragraphs. This is not your work." "Oh, that is exactly my work." I said, "What are you talking about? Not your work." He said, "I typed it myself." "Oh," I said, "Oh, I see. So plagiarizing is not copying somebody else's work if you typed it yourself." "Yes." I said, "Well, you're still getting a 0. Let's go back to class." And so the next class I had, some students came in, "Hey, I heard you caught so-and-so plagiarizing." So I said, "That's an interesting question. What do you think about the plagiarizing rule and the fact that the student got a 0 for plagiarizing?" A student raised his hand. He said, "I think that's wrong." I said, "Why do you think it's wrong?" He said, "Well, because," I said, "Don't you know that's lying? He was lying to my face." I said, "The plagiarism was one thing, but the denial, the lie was a whole different thing." He said, "Well, I don't agree that lying is wrong." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "Well, I'll explain it." He took a good 8 minutes to explain it. But basically it was, if you get what you want, you don't get caught, no one else gets hurt, then lying is okay.
Okay, so that's sort of the argument of the ends justifying the means.
Exactly. And that shocked me. And I was teaching at a Christian school at this time, so I'm thinking that this is obviously an outlier candidate here. How many other people in the class agree with what was just stated? And virtually every hand went up in the class. I had 18 students in the class. All 18 hands went up. I went, y'all are just protecting this person. So I went around the room, started asking them, that was truly true. I taught, I think, 88 students that particular year. I did this same question and answer in all of my classes. And I think I might have had 6 or 7 students out of the 88 that didn't raise their hands.
So let me ask you a question. Let me just ask you a question, because this is interesting, because this is something that I've heard many times. And as long as what I'm doing is not hurting anyone else, then it's okay. Is that kind of the framework we're looking at here?
That's correct. And what it goes back to, it's a humanistic view of life, and that's justice for you. If you get what you want, no matter what you have to do to get it, in the sense of nobody else getting hurt, that's justice for you.
Give me some practical examples of how that is affecting a company today, in the way that the leadership team is operating, in the way that people are interacting with their employees.
I think that in that regard, it is super important. I wrote a book called Unleash the Millennials and Save the World. And in this book, I introduced this idea of recapturing truth and knowability in the workplace. Because part of the issue that you have when you have these different generations, it's not that they're not communicating. It's just that what they're saying isn't necessarily being understood the same way by the generations. And so the danger that happens in the workforce is that a boomer or an Xer may tell a millennial that this is what they want done. And what the millennial is hearing is that this needs to be done, and they're going to do it however they need to get it done, not understanding or appreciating that there's a particular method that the company realizes or recognizes as their way of doing something.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's break this down here. You said truth and knowability.
Yeah.
Did I hear that right?
That's correct. What is true, and how do you know it is true?
Okay, so this is very interesting, because we're in an environment right now. We're recording this around the corona crisis and all that kind of stuff. There's been a shift in people's thinkings in terms of, because people are working remotely or semi-remotely, I need to focus on managing by outcomes as opposed to managing by the things that someone is doing every day. And yet what you're saying here, which is interesting, is that there needs to be a focus both on the outcomes and on what they're doing because of the danger of perhaps them doing things that you don't want them to do in order to achieve those outcomes. Am I hearing that right?
You're absolutely hearing that right. But here's where the disconnect comes in, or what I'm trying to coach the businesses that I work with, is that the millennials may actually have a better idea or a better way of doing something that they're going to implement that the boomer or the Xer may not necessarily understand or agree with. But that's because they don't know what the millennial knows in regards to how to get things done in today's world. Millennials they've been disparaged in media for years. And there's a lot of people say this is what they do. And they give these horrible examples of who millennials are. But who millennials are really in reality, they're the most educated generation in human history. They have been digitally trained. They're unbelievable. They are the exact generation that's necessary for today, for what's coming. So what I challenge boomers to do in the workplace who are managing millennials is tell the millennial what it is that they want to do, what they want the millennial to do. And the first thing a millennial is going to ask is, well, why do you want me to do that? And it's not, the answer is not because the contract says so or because I say so. That's not why the millennial is asking that question. The millennial wants to know, and this is what the boomer needs to consider when they make the assignment, is what is the foundational reason why this is being done? Why does this have to be done? Well, the client needs this done. Well, why does the client need that done? Well, there's a regulation that said that they have to have this in place. Why is that regulation in place? Well, it was put in the 1940s, and it was to deal with this. So what in the millennials' mind, they've been trained to occupy jobs that weren't invented. And that was the second area that we have outside this technology area. And because the technology shift had changed in the education arena, I wouldn't have known this unless I was an educator. But in the education arena, educators have had to change how they teach students from first grade all the way through college for jobs that they would occupy when they graduated from college. It used to be industrial age, you knew what the jobs were going to be. They've been around for 400 years. In this connected age, we don't know what the jobs are going to be for kids in third grade who are going to graduate from college because they haven't even been invented yet. 60% to 70% of the jobs that they will occupy in the next 12 years when they graduate from high school or college have not yet even been invented. How do you train a student for that? How you train the student for that is to train them to answer very specific questions and then a pathway to a solution of how it is done. So the next question the millennial is going to ask, once you tell them why, it's the foundation, how do you do that? And so then you're going to explain how you do that. They're going to figure out that back in the 1940s, something was different than this is today. That regulation needs to be changed, or there's a different way we can answer that regulatory need other than doing this. And that's where the millennials just have light years ahead of where the boomers and Xers are in terms.
Explaining the why is really important. And then in terms of explaining the how, is that where the need is to step up and align the outcome with the means?
This is where creativity, innovation thrive, right here in the how. Okay. And how that creativity and innovation thrives is with the ability to fail, the permission to fail. That's so important. And the boomers expecting that to be done, I want it done this way, and because I know it works every single time. But if they let the millennials say, I don't care how you do it, well, I do care within this parameters I've set up. But within that framework, you can do this however you want to do it. How would you suggest that we do this? This is how we do it now. How would you suggest we do this that'll last another 10 years? And every time I've told a business owner that, and I've told that many times, is I've always tell them to find your most difficult problem that you're working on or a problem that you're really having trouble implementing. Get your top 3 millennials in the room, sit them down, say you're working as a team. They want to work as a team. You're going to work as a team, and I want you to come back to me within a week with how you would do this. This is how we do it now. How would you do this? And literally it's not even take them a week. Usually within 2 or 3 days, they'll come back with an entirely different way of doing it that's actually better, that typically involves some kind of a technology change or infrastructure change internally to get it done. And more often than not, they've actually developed an app that's not connected to the internet yet, but they do have an app that would go along with it that they demonstrate to these owners, and they're just blown away. Well, how do these kids even know how to program? It's a whole different story.
That's actually a really nice framework there. You take your toughest challenge, you bring your top 3 millennials in the room, and you say, within these parameters, I'd like you guys to figure out how to solve it. How do you bridge the gap then between the millennials coming up with new ways of doing things and the older folks who are used to doing things in a certain way? How do you handle that disruption?
It's perfect. And in fact, what you're wanting them to do is what you're wanting your older talent to do is to help the millennials to identify what the disruptors are going to be moving forward. And how they do that is through this idea, what I call idea of transferring institutional knowledge into the millennial talent to say, this is what I know about what we're doing. And part of the boomer hesitancy, boomers have maybe another 5 years left in the workforce, maybe 6, 7. If they can work past 65, but that's still the last the boomers reach 65. And they're afraid to death, scared to death to let go of their institutional knowledge because they're going to be shown the door,
Right.
And the idea is not that they're going to be shown the door, but things that can be innovated. If they were innovated today, were still valuable for the company. If you leave the company with that information, it's worth zero. And that's what the millennial's looking to do. He or she is looking to creatively innovate something that they know will work and be successful for the organization.
One of the issues that the difference between the younger generations and the older is that the older generations, they value the amount of knowledge that they have in their heads because that's how they learned in the past. Whereas the younger generation, all they have to do is pick up their phone and Google it, and they can come up with a bunch of information right off the top of their fingertips. And so that sort of ABC knowledge or that structural knowledge isn't so important. It's more the experiential knowledge that the older generations have that they need to be able to pass on to the younger generations, that wisdom, so to speak, as opposed to just knowledge. What mistakes do people make when they're building their leadership teams and incorporating millennials into those leadership teams?
Typically, it is refusal. It's not a bad refusal, but it's a refusal of the boomers and Xers to let the millennials do it the way the millennials want to do it. That's really where the disconnect comes in, because the boomers and Xers, especially the boomers, recognize that if we stop doing it the way we're doing it, we're going to be out of business because they're thinking it's going to continue like that for at least until they retire, right? And the reality is that you have to start changing now. It is almost getting to the point where it's too late to even change because of what's coming. You just go on, do a Google search on AI technology or the latest advancements in the construction industry. And if you don't understand the things that they're displaying right there and for 2020, the 16 items, the millennials see that and they want that in their job sites and in their activities that they're doing. So that's really where when they bring a millennial up to the executive suite and they say, okay, this is what your role is. Again, there's this idea that this is a static role that they're going to occupy. The millennial doesn't want a static role. They don't necessarily want the desk. They want to do things that are creatively innovative because they're creating a future that is yet to be. And they know that. The industrial age we're limited in the industrial age of what we can get to. They want to be on the rocket ship to Mars.
The technology obviously is something that the younger generations embrace and they understand and they feel in their bones. But still, I own my own company. I run my own business. I look at some of these guys and gals and they just don't have the experience or the wisdom necessary to step into leadership roles in a really strong way, just because they haven't been on the planet long enough. So how do I help them to bridge that human wisdom gap that perhaps they don't have yet?
This is called the Next Generation Leader Initiative. I've got it right now in $1 billion company. We're working in a $1 billion company initiating this, is where you take your top millennial talent and lunch and learns once a month. With this particular company, do lunch and learns once a month, so it doesn't take away from anybody's work time. And they transfer key institutional knowledge about the business of their business. This is why we do things, and this is how we do things. Okay. And that's what they present every week. How do they do finances? How do they do engineering drawings? How do they do a project scoping? How do they do implementation strategies? All that stuff that you don't learn until you're 35 to 40 to 45, because you're never in those meetings when those meetings are occurring. They're unveiling everything that they do at the executive level down to the millennial talent. For just that reason, which is in the next 5 years, they realize the millennial talent's going to start taking over these areas and they have to know what's going on. And without that, they are lost because they don't necessarily know all the chain of command. That's another thing that you mentioned. The millennials don't depend upon head knowledge, but they can go to it with a cell phone. Right. Millennials don't recognize hierarchy. So a lot of times if you're the president of your own construction company, and believe me, I've talked to a lot of them, the first question I ask is, when was the last time a new millennial walked into your office and asked you what you were doing? And they all laugh. They say, that's exactly almost every one of them. They'll open up my door or they'll knock on my door and say, hey, Mr. Smith, what are you working on today? And they're like, who are you? Right. Where'd you come from? Well, I got hired last week and I just thought I'd drop by and introduce myself and see what you're working on. And so this idea of hierarchy and respecting that hierarchy of knowledge, there is nowhere for a millennial.
So that's the challenge for a lot of construction companies, because the way a construction project works or has worked in the past, very much structured like a military operation in many ways. There's many analogies there. What I'm curious about, though, is because of the demographic gap between the boomers and the millennials, because the Gen Xers was a smaller generation, there's guys and gals coming into leadership, senior leadership positions, maybe 10 years earlier than in the past. And that 10-year time frame is a time where how to lead more effectively. So how can boomers help millennials lead more effectively in the human interactions?
That is a great question. That's exactly the reason why they are not obsolete in the workforce, is that the boomers and really the older Xers should be acting as coaches and mentors of the millennial talent. And what I mean by that is that as they transfer institutional knowledge, they're also transferring how is business conducted. All business is people business. We're all dealing with people, whether you're dealing with AI or not, or there's people behind the AI. There's people in the companies that you're dealing with. And so how do you get that people person or people skills into the millennial talent? That's how you do it, through the idea of coaching and mentoring. Mentoring is demonstrating to the millennial how you do what you do.
Okay.
The coaching part is how do you allow a millennial to express how they would do it, then allow them to do it.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's say I'm a CEO. I've identified a millennial who's perhaps going to be my next COO, perhaps could be replacing me at some point. If I'm smart, I've got more than one candidate, because we know that in succession planning, you need to have more than one candidate lined up for one position. How would you go about initiating that coaching relationship with the millennial, and what would you focus on in that coaching relationship?
I would focus on first the relationship, building the relationship. And how that enters is that basically just, I'm going to coach you. And believe me, 80% of millennials want to be coached. Or 90% want to be coached. And 90% want direct feedback. And so the idea that entering into that coaching relationship is that I'm now going to start coaching you in this position for you to assume this position. And so how that coaching is initiated is by asking questions. John or Susan, this is a situation that we have in the business. How would you handle this situation? And what information do you need to know in order for you to make that decision? And then allow them to start asking the questions back. This is how I would do it, and this is the information I need. Then provide them the information and allow them to figure out how to do it on their own, because they're going to do it different than the boomer would do it. On a mentoring basis, the boomer would say, this is how you do that. The boomer's not. Really rarely does the boomer should give any direction in a coaching relationship. They should just allow the millennial to figure it out. And that's what they love. They want to figure it out and to keep the guardrails on so that when they come back, or at least short enough that they have to come back, and you can say, well, in your mind, you can say, man, I've tried that 100 times and it's never going to work. But don't tell the millennial that. Just say, okay, what are you going to do when you encounter this kind of resistance or this challenge, which is going to be there in front of you, and allow the millennial to say, well, this is how I would overcome that challenge. This is how I would get around this. And then allow them to work that out, because the boomer may not necessarily know of new technologies and new ways of doing things that are currently available today. That's not even something they have to invent. It's already currently available today.
So let me just take it back then to when you first got into the high school class. So your impression with the plagiarism was that the millennials had this idea of the ends justifying the means. And the way to manage that way of thinking, explain the why, and then to give the parameters for them to work within in terms of how they should be doing something.
That's correct. That's correct.
So what happens when you give them the range of the means that I want you to use? What happens when they begin to push against those parameters of the means? And they say, your box isn't big enough. You need to get a bigger box. What do you do then?
That's, again, in the idea of coaching, in the idea of coaching area. If they can show you why that box is too small, then maybe you need to explore outside the box and say, okay, let's try this on a pilot project. That's a great idea. If you can demonstrate on this next job that going outside the box is fine, and this is what I'm encouraging all, because of this disconnect in this idea of the ends, or the ends justify the means, right, is a part of this that they have to establish internally is what is this idea of truth, and how do we know it's true? Almost all companies have this idea of core values within their organization. They all have mission statements and vision statements, but this is the core values of the company, is to have a meeting with the millennials that you're working with, that you're bringing up, is to have a discussion with them of what are your what do you know? What do you mean when you say your core values? Our core value is excellence. Explain what you mean. This is what excellence means to us as an organization. To get buy-in by the millennial, that will be their means, that will be their measure of excellence and not their own measure of excellence.
Then you as a leader have to be very good at explaining those values and what that looks like in the daily behaviors that people use in order to achieve the ends.
That's correct. Because what the thing that you want to have internally more than anything is 5 things: trust, truth, honesty, integrity, and how to keep a confidence, how to keep a secret. Trust. I trust if I say something to you, I'm trusting that it's actually going to be done.
Right.
Truth. If I say something to you or you say something to me, it is true. This is really what occurred. Honesty. That when you're dealing with people, both internally and externally, you're going to conduct yourself in an honest manner, not changing scales or something like that. Integrity. The way that you are on the job is the same way that you are outside the job. So this idea that you're not going to get a bad reputation from something one of your employees does while they're not on the job site. And the last one is how to keep a confidence. So you've just bid on an $18 million construction job, and your millennial was involved in it every step of the way, and they helped put together the final package, and you just put it in the mail at 2:00 and it's supposed to be there at 3:00. You don't want your millennial talent to get on their phone with their friend John, who works at the competitor, and say, oh yeah, by the way, we just submitted our bid for $18 million. And this is how we did it. And they start talking, and then John's company sends off a bid to the first 17.5. And again, from a millennial perspective, in their mind, they just need to know, what does it mean to keep a confidence? So if I say this is confidential, it doesn't go out on Twitter as soon as they leave the meeting.
That's interesting. Yeah, the instinct of a lot of millennials and younger folks is to be very open and transparent about their lives, but at times there's a time to speak and a time not to speak.
That's correct.
So let's get into some action items here. What are 2 or 3 steps that I need to be taking in the next 90 days to make sure that I'm maximizing the impact of my millennial leaders?
First thing I would suggest is to identify the succession of the leadership. So who's retiring the next 5 years, the next 3 years, the next 2 years? Identify the person that's going to, and most people have done this already, but identify the person who's going to fill the slot. And when you have the slots that aren't yet filled, and for the ones who you are actually saying, Jane's going to take this slot. Then go to your millennial talent that you have on staff and identify 1 to 2, as you said, 1 to 2 candidates for each of the slots that will be filled. Even if you already have somebody identified, start a next generation leader initiative with those individuals where you start to teach them the business of your business. This is how we do our business. This is how we do our marketing. This is how we do our financial controls. This is how we do invoicing. This is how we do purchasing. This is how we do hiring. This is how we do firing. It goes from A to Z, as many modules that you want to teach. And typically all companies already have all this information. They've only let people know it once they reach that level. Then the next step is that once they are put into a position, once you put a millennial into a position, that the training doesn't stop. Is that most people, what they do is that they fill a chair with a person and then they go about their job. Yep. The company does, leaving the person alone to either sink or swim. And if they sink, well, they go find another person. If they swim, well, that's great for them. The millennial wants to be given direction, not told what to do, but given direction in the sense, am I doing it correctly? Am I doing it in a way that is beneficial to the company? And that's where the older staff come in to help the millennials in that transition from being a 32-year-old middle manager to 33-year-old C-suite executive. That 33-year-old C-suite executive person needs to have somebody within that C-suite who will mentor and coach them in what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
Excellent. Excellent. I really appreciate your time here, Philip. How can people get hold of you if they'd like to?
The easiest way is my website is engineeringleadershipdesign.com, engineeringleadershipdesign.com. And if they want to check out my book, it's unleashthemillennials.com.
So we'll put a link in the show notes to both your website and to your book. And I like to finish off each interview just by asking my guests, and this is kind of out of left field a little bit, but Philip, tell us your favorite place to eat.
Favorite place to eat? It's at home right now.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. I've learned to make bread, and we're making some great food here, but actually it's pizza. I like to go out and get takeout pizza.
Excellent. What's your favorite pizza, and where are you located?
Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay, Baton Rouge. Give us your favorite pizza joint in Baton Rouge.
Lit Pizza. They make it faster than Burger King makes it the way you wanted. The Lit Pizza has you a pizza all ready by the time you would go to a Burger King or any fast food restaurant and get your burger in a bag. They've got your custom-made pizza ready. It's unbelievable.
Lit, L-I-T?
L-I-T.
Okay, Lit Pizza.
Phenomenal.
We'll put a link in the show notes. If you're ever in Baton Rouge, you got to check out Lit Pizza.
Yeah, man, they're fantastic.
Awesome. Philip, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for sharing your insights, and I do wish you all the best. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.